This video is presented by newwoodworker.com. We can use any of our favorite tools to make the basic tenon, from which we'll get a haunched tenon later. We can use a router table, a table saw with a stacked dado set, or a tenoning jig. But when it comes time to define the tenon on the outside of our workpiece, we want to stop and don't do that. The haunch runs all the way to the outside edge of the board, so we leave that side alone for now. The haunch really is just a clever way of filling a groove at the outside end of the board. Woodworkers like to use this groove system with a mortise and tenon joint for things like building cabinet doors. After forming the tenon, the next thing we need to know is how deep the groove is. I almost always make these grooves 3/8 of an inch deep. That consistency helps me lay out things like this haunch without messing it up. I also tend to make my tenons a 1/2 inch in from either end of the board. There again, the consistency helps me avoid mistakes when setting up things like my bandsaw. First, I'll cut the inside edge where we made the shoulder cut earlier. The important thing here is not to go too fast and run into the shoulder on the board, and that gives me a nice clean edge on that end of the tenon. When I cut this side to define the haunch, I always go right up to this line but stop just a little bit short. I like to start out where I know the haunch will be just a little bit long so I can sneak up on the perfect cut. Now I can dry fit the joint, and sure enough, it's a little bit long. It's much easier to trim a haunch that's a little bit long than try and fill a hole on one that's too short. I don't have to take off much material, so I just take my time and get this right. Now I'll dry fit the joint again and tap it in to make sure that it's fully seated. And it's just a little bit too long yet. After one more trim cut, I actually have to tap the joint together to get this haunch to seat all the way. For some reason, a haunched tenon never really looks right until you get it sanded and finished. I'm not real sure why that is, but it just seems to happen all the time. So we'll go off and sand and finish this thing so I can see what it really looks like. I glued this up last night, so it's had a few hours in the clamp to dry. Like I said, this joint can look pretty rough before you sand it and finish it, especially if you whack it with a mallet a few times. I'm going to sand this piece up a little bit using my Bosch random orbital sander with some 220 paper on it. Altogether, I sanded this piece for about 2 minutes, but I figured you wouldn't stick around if I showed all of that. Other than the sanding, I haven't done any other preparation to this wood, so I'm just going to rub in a little Danish oil so you can see how this joint looks when you apply finish to it. It really does look like any other mortise and tenon joint, except that you have the added detail of that haunch on the edge. This is easy to do, you don't need any special tools, and it's something you need to learn.